everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith. We are going to pick things up where we left off in the last episode of our playthrough of Solomon Kane from Mythic Games. And we had begun Chapter 3A and set everything up. You can see we're inside of a scene. Solomon Kane, Gaston have entered into the room. We have our virtue Providence in the spirit realm, as well as a couple of shadows there to greet us. As we're playing in solo mode, we have Providence, whose aim is to try and ensure that Solomon Kane stays in the light, not only during the story portions, which we've already seen in the last video, but also during scenes, which we've set up here. But you'll also see there is darkness in the area, and these are shadows that Solomon Kane cannot see, but senses and knows they're present. And of course, by controlling Providence, we're trying to offset that darkness and ensure Solomon Kane isn't defeated. So we'll be taking a look at this stat track a lot, because if ever the strength, clarity, or compassion go down to 0 or would move from 1 to 0, well, that's going to result in a defeat. And at that point, we're going to check out the storybook we're playing through, and it's going to tell us what happened in terms of a narrative. If the danger track ever gets to 11 or more, Solomon Kane has been overwhelmed by his foes and is also defeated. So not only is this track interesting in terms of how it affects the tests that Solomon Kane will go through in these 4 different areas, or even the number of shadows and danger that are currently on the board, but there is loss conditions tied to this as well, so this becomes a very important part of the gameplay. Let's talk quickly about discovery cards and the icons that can be found on them in order to categorize these discovery cards into certain buckets. You can see 2 types right here in front of you. The 2 on the left-hand side have the sword icons. These are opportunities, basically opportunities that didn't exist until the card showed up during the narrative or during the story, or maybe even out of a scene. But now we have the ability to take advantage of whatever's on them. With this one, you have to place a die, just like an action, in order to be able to take advantage of the below, which is to add more darkness cards in the pile. Going into this scene, we have 8 darkness cards, which is much more than we had when we were running through the story chapters in the last video. So we probably don't need that as much, but we might if time starts running out on us. And that would have us putting a fear die in here in order to get that darkness card to then place in the darkness deck on the bottom. Over here, Distrust, this one is one that we can just go ahead and make use of on our turn at any time. -1 to Compassion, and then 1 virtue can change 1 reserved or donated die, although when you're playing in solo mode with Providence, there is no donations from any other virtues, so you can skip that idea. And you can see it says to fear. So actually, this will allow us to lose compassion to gain a fear die, which we could then eventually use here to add darkness. So you can even use some of these synergies together. The 2 cards on the right-hand side have the gear symbol. These stand for ongoing effects. You want to keep your eyes on these. They usually have to do with the narrative or something going on in the world, and they could be triggered at any point in time, so you really want to make sure you've read those clearly. You can see this one for Gaston, who is our current companion, says whenever he removes an exploration token, and we know he'll be trying to do this because he has the keyword Seeker and Vandal that came from the storybook that told us this for Chapter 3A, he's going to be walking around trying to pick up exploration tokens just like Solomon Kane is, but his tokens for Gaston that he picks up is going to go on this card instead. Very interesting. So this is more so just more evidence of the confusion around this quote-unquote companion that's with us, and whether or not they're really out for their own gain, or maybe even to mess Solomon Kane over, or there's some type of traitor mechanic going on in there, or they're just greedy. I don't know what it is. We got to figure it out. That's part of the fun. And then on the right-hand side here, it says when the last exploration is removed from the board, then we move on to the next discovery card as it mentions. Just before we dive into gameplay, I want to talk specifically about the keywords Seeker and Vandal so you understand when they trigger. Seeker is a keyword which is currently connected to Gaston, and it states at the end of each virtue turn, so at Providence's end of turn, a Seeker will move 1 area towards the nearest X, and in this case the X is the exploration token as it mentions on the chapter page. So Seeker triggers first, in other words, movement would occur. Now, if the actual individual was standing in a zone with an exploration token, this movement wouldn't need to occur. They would just stay put. And if the individual, Gaston, hadn't moved this turn, then his Vandal keyword will kick off and he will go ahead and destroy that exploration token. But if he has moved, he will not destroy anything. Let's go ahead and begin Providence's turn. We'll roll our 4 dice, thanks to the +1 die right there. Let's see what we get. And we also have a whole bunch of dice sitting up in the reserved area. We got a Pain, we have a Fear, Bravery, and we have Faith, which can be used as a wild. After thinking about this, I'm going to go ahead and re-roll this Fear because I already have 2 Fear in my reserve. So let's see if we can get something else. And I don't want another Bravery if I flipped it. There we go. That's a little bit better. So a Pain. So this is a situation where I don't have the dice that I want in order to do something in my hand on either side. So what I'm going to do is I'm definitely going to use this right here. This satisfies, and this one's a wild in this case, and that's going to allow me to do a move 1. I could also place a light if I chose to do that, but moving at this point is the thing I want to focus on for now, unless I get a really good dice roll in the future. So what do I do with the rest of my dice? Well, I can choose right now to ditch some of these ones in the reserve slot and put some of these other ones in there. So I think I'll take this one and I'll remove this one out and I'll save the Pain. I'm just going to go ahead and let those go. Now you can see I could be able to do this, Talk, Fight, or Explore 0, but that's not going to help me right now. I'm not within range to do anything around those 3 things that are going to help me. So it makes sense to have Solomon Kane move to the west. The other bonus to this is that now he is inside the aura of Providence, which means I'm going to be able to hopefully help Solomon Kane out now that I'm within that 1 range aura. And I can be in the same space as the virtue or in 1 space out from it. And if I put light back on the +1 aura size on my Providence board, then Providence can affect spaces 2 spaces away from where it currently sits, having a much bigger aura. But as of right now, 1 is fine. So now I get to decide if I want to discard anything from my left hand or right hand, or even both, if I want to cycle some cards from what's actually in my hand down here. And I kind of do, because the cards in my hand right now are really helpful for the current situation I'm in. This one's actually not bad either, and the reason it's good is that it would allow me to go ahead and gain a +1 on either Strength, Compassion, or Clarity. And for the purposes of this scene, exploring is really, really important, and exploring is tied to the stat Clarity. So the higher I can rank up my Clarity, which has already been hit quite a few times on the negative side of things, if I can get that up, I might get a +1, +2, or +3 advantage there. But you can see I'm increasing the danger every time to pull this off. So there is a trade-off there. And for the first time ever, as this danger increases, you'll notice on the stat track, and because we're inside of a scene, that threshold for the shadow spawn definitely matters on the danger track. You can see where the current token is on the danger track. It sits where there are 2 shadows showing underneath. You can see on the track it's 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. There are game effects that will put tokens beside this track to increase it on you. You might even have the 2 spot that we're currently in terms of the number of shadows, jump up to 3 or even higher in particular adventures. So based on the fact I really like the cards that I have in hand, I'm going to discard both of the cards that are currently in my hands, left and right, and replace them. I've instead put Courtesy into play, which will help me with putting light, and this one right here will allow me to move 2, which will give me quite a few options. With the Virtue turn done, we now move to the Seeker keyword triggering and the Vandal keyword. And as we know, the Seeker keyword will have Gaston move 1 towards one of the exploration tokens, and then the Vandal keyword will not trigger because he moved already this turn. And it wouldn't have mattered even if it had a trigger because there's no exploration token in his space. And now, unfortunately, we have to reveal a darkness card, so let's go ahead and find out what happens. So at the very top here, we do have the story icon. We've been pulling this one all the time through the last couple chapters, and we always resolve that one when we're doing a story, but we actually skip this when we're doing a scene, and we move right to this second section right here. So just to highlight the different sections of this darkness card, the story one's on top. We're going to skip this one when we're inside of a scene. The next one is the near section. This is the one we're going to focus on first. And then we have the far section, and then we have spawning. So in the second second section here for near. Near basically means anything or anyone that's inside of Solomon's current space or adjacent surrounding him. So basically anything here or anything in these adjacent spaces around Solomon Kane. Currently, in terms of enemies, there's nobody. So we can easily skip that section and move to the far section, and then we just start at the very top like you would if any of these sections would activate and go from top to bottom. And each miniature in play can only be activated by one of the abilities once. So even if there's multiple iterations of what would seem to be multiple activations, once a miniature has been activated and done something, that's it for that miniature. And we're going to go right here. The top one says one scout searches. We currently don't have any scouts at all, and scouts are the major keyword of that line, so we skip past this. It says the furthest scout moves one towards Solomon Kane. Not gonna happen. The next one says the westernmost scout moves one east. Not gonna happen. Then it says the furthest shadow moves 3 to threaten. This is the furthest shadow. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 from Solomon Kane's position. This shadow is 3 from Solomon Kane's position. If there's ever a tie, players get to decide. And remember, for every darkness card, once you've activated a miniature, that miniature can no longer be activated again from the same darkness card. And it states that it's going to move 3 to threaten. So we're basically going to have a shadow move from here, and it's going to go 1, 2, and the question now is, does it go into the same space as the Virtue Providence, or does it go off to the side to avoid it? And when resolving darkness cards, if there's ever multiple options, the player gets to decide. So in my case, I get to decide where this shadow is going to go based on how I want my strategy to pan out. So I could have the shadow move to just actually be here or over here, which is still adjacent to Solomon Kane, allowing me to satisfy the darkness card's threatening position. And by being a threatening shadow, the shadow's aura is reducing all of Solomon Kane's tests by 1 and increasing all tests which target Solomon Kane. And this is cumulative, so it can really get nasty with a lot of shadows around him. The other thing I could do is I could have this shadow go straight into the same space as my Virtue Providence. And if I allowed that to happen, I could, if I wanted to, have a shockwave occur. And when that occurs, the shadows that are all within the aura of Providence would all be removed. And why that's important to note is that the aura of Providence currently is set to be the same space that Providence is in, plus 1 around as well. The reason why that's really cool is if this shadow happened to run into this space and this shadow was actually right here, everything that's in that unseen realm, which would be shadows and Providence, they all get wiped out. So the timing of when you do this type of shockwave is really critical because you want to try and take out as many shadows as possible with your Virtue when that shockwave occurs. Now the other option you have, if the shadow is to move into the same position as one of your Virtues, is you can choose to hold your ground, and then the shadow cannot move into the area. You return the shadow to the last area it was before the Virtue's turn, and its movement just ends. But the downside of that is the danger increases by 1. Now, based on the fact I have a whole bunch of dice in my reserved area, and plus I'll be rolling 4 additional, I should be able to just wait it out a little bit longer and maybe be able to bump up the aura size of Providence and take out both at once rather than triggering it early. This could really backfire on me, but I'm going to try that route. So I'm actually going to have the shadow go from where it currently is to right here. We'll keep moving down. It states 3 hunters move 1 and fight 3. We don't have any hunters, so we can skip past that. And now we move to the spawn. So the spawning of a shadow would show up at Y, and Y is actually right here, but we have to check the spawn threshold first. And as of right now, thanks to not tipping my danger up by 1 earlier on, we're still with just 2 shadows at max in play, which is great because nothing extra is coming out. And you'll also note the fact that I didn't have the shadow that activated go in here, trigger a shockwave, removing both of these from the board, to just seconds later having another shadow show up right here and no Providence to help immediately. So that was another reason I didn't bother having the shadow go into the Virtue space. Wanted to explain this after it actually happened, so it makes more sense now. And of course, I knew this because the whole darkness card is revealed, and sometimes you'll want to take a look at that darkness card to see what's coming, because there's obviously ripple effects to your decisions. And I mean, if you can prepare to avoid nasty ones like another shadow popping up immediately after you remove one, you might want to do that. The turn comes back around to us. Let's see how this pans out. Oh wow, that's a lot of pain right there. 3 pain and 1 on the faith. I think what we'll probably end up doing is flipping one of these to the opposite side to get a determination. And that's actually exactly what we're going to do. We have a great lineup of dice between what we have here and in the reserve. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this one over. And then we're going to go ahead and slot these into a bunch of different actions. Now this is going to be a really fun turn. We ended up getting 3 actions fully filled in, and we've got light placement available to us. We can remove danger. We've got movement options, light options again. We also have the ability to potentially explore. So yes, we should be able, I'm hoping, to place at least 1 light, which I would like to try and increase the aura of Providence. I'd also like to get Solomon Kane moved into an area with an exploration token, and we can explore one of those tokens. So with courtesy, I've gone ahead and discarded the dice. I'm going to place 1 light, and it is going to go on the aura side. So that way, if we do a shockwave, we're able to hit more shadows than normal. I'll wait till that other shadow gets in there, because it probably will in this upcoming darkness turn. Next up, I'm going to discard some dice here in order to move 1 rather than place light. And then after that, I'm going to discard these 2 dice in order to explore one of the tokens in Solomon Kane's space. So with a move and explore, I think the right option here is to move Solomon Kane to this space right here with the exploration token outside of the aura of the shadow. So let's go ahead and do our first explore action. As we can see inside the chapter book, when you do an explore action, this is the discovery card you'll get based on the result you end up getting. So if you get a 5 is D203, 6 to 8 is D204, and a 9+ is D205. Let's go ahead and do an explore action. The first thing we do when the test is made by Solomon Kane is we check our clarity modifier to see if we get any bonus or any kind of penalty for that. We currently sit right in the middle, so we get nothing. We're gonna have to work on that. The next thing we check is we get a -1 for every shadow in Solomon Kane's surroundings. Thankfully, I moved away from the shadow that was in my surroundings, and I had to anyway because the token I wanted to interact with was way over here, out of the range of that shadow, so no -1 for that shadow. And if there's multiple shadows around, that can compile into quite a large penalty. The next thing you check is for Providence, when playing with Providence, is this right here, the only one that I don't have light on, which is a +X to all tests. So the way I have things currently situated, I'm going to get no bonus whatsoever for having Providence around me, which is really unfortunate. I'm going to have to work on getting some light in this position. You can see that if I get light in this position, it's going to add X to all tests, and the X in this case is the light tokens on Providence's board. So if I place a token here, that is a +3 to all of Solomon Kane's checks going forward. That is definitely in my best interest to do. The next thing we do after we check those 3 areas is we're going to draw a random event card right from the top of the deck, and I'll show you what I got. We got this right here. The only thing we care about are the numbers at the bottom. And if you're using Solomon Kane, the only number you care about is on the far right-hand side. There are 3 tiers to this. You'll find them in the rulebook, depending on what character you're using that's taking this test and at what level they're at. Solomon Kane is considered to be a hero, so he uses the far right number, which in this case is a 7, which is really impressive because I have absolutely nothing in terms of positive modifications to this, and that still nets us right in the middle of this check. As you can see, a 7 is going to place us right there for D204, which is the one I got. We're going to flip over this discovery card and see what happens. Signs of a struggle. Kane examines the blood stains and splintered bed frame. You get a +1 clarity, a +1 compassion, and remove the exploration token. That's a plus. A +1 to clarity and compassion is going to bump clarity to 6, which is close to getting a +1 modification, but compassion will get the +1. I really want to try to get that clarity to +1. I think that'll help us quite a bit. Not bad, not bad at all. So let's see what we can do about trying to get that +1 in the future. If we can't pull it off, or it seems too risky around the darkness side of things and increasing the spawn threshold, then maybe we'll hold off, but pretty happy with what we found. For those interested in seeing the breakdown, I'll give it to you pretty quick in terms of the event card that you saw me pull, in terms of the number that showed and which one I chose. The right one was the one I chose because it actually aligns with a hero, and it states right here, unless otherwise specified, Solomon Kane always uses the hero level, so always the right number unless a scenario tells you otherwise. The nemesis on the villain side would use the right side. Center number would be used by the champion and villain. The left number will be used by crowds and rabble, so basically the lowest of the low between allies and enemies. And then the number ranges gives you an idea as to what numbers you can expect. We actually got literally the highest number you can possibly get, which is crazy, and I promise you I shuffled those cards. And then this one says most common result is 4 for that row that Solomon Kane is in. At this point, Gaston is going to go ahead and his keywords will activate. So Seeker will trigger. He's going to go towards the nearest exploration token, 1 away from him. Happens to be right here. Remember, it doesn't matter. He is a individual that exists in the physical realm, and this is a spiritual shadow that only cares about messing with Solomon Kane. So them being in the same space, there's no issues there. Next up, his Vandal keyword would trigger, but because he moved this turn, he doesn't get to vandalize that token, which does give Solomon Kane a quick second if he wants to try to run over there in order to deal with it. And maybe, depending on how the dice go in the next turn, I might be able to move Providence into that space and cause a shockwave, and I'm going to cross my fingers that the darkness card will draw the other shadow that's really far away closer to me so I can take them all out at once. Here is the next darkness card. So again, we ignore the story section up top. This one here is anything that's near Solomon Kane or in the surroundings, essentially, or in his space. Nothing to talk about there, so we can skip that whole middle section. The far away individual says 1 sentry. We don't have any. 2 scouts. Nope. The southernmost scout. Nope. The closest shadow. Moves 2 to engage. Well, that's truly unfortunate, and when a shadow moves into the exact same space as Solomon Kane, something very interesting happens. The shadow is immediately removed and an event card is pulled. Faltering Will. All virtues without their miniature on the board discard 1 active action card. Okay, well, we currently have our virtue on the board, so no issues there. 1 virtue removes 1 donated dice. We can ignore that because when we're playing solo, you can't get donated dice. We only have reserve dice. The next one says all virtues remove 1 dice from their reserve. Well, there goes the one that I do have in my reserve. And the final thing on the card states to place 1 mercy. So I'll grab 1 mercy cube and add it to the cloud. The last line in the 3rd section states the furthest shadow moves 3 to threaten. As this is the only shadow in the game right now, this is definitely the furthest one. It also hasn't activated prior on this darkness cards, so it's now going to go ahead to move 3 to threaten, meaning it's going to stop just 1 space away from Solomon Kane. So moving where it currently is 1, 2, I have options of either placing it here or here, and the great news is I could place it as far away as over here, even though Providence is here, because I bumped up the light on the aura size for Providence so she can reach up to 2 spaces away. The final thing on the card we need to deal with is the spawn on X. Now, reading ahead on the darkness card is always important because you can see down here that the spawn is going to be on X, and you'll notice my shadow has moved from that position to this position. That's because I've chosen instead to place it closer to Providence so that if I wish to, I can have Providence move into that space where the shadow is to cause a shockwave and take it out. Because the new shadow that's coming into play based on the shadow threshold of 2, and there's 1 currently in here, 1 more shadow is going to spawn in position X. And the X spawn location is on the far west side of the board, which sounds really far away, but we are actually making our way west as we go through each of these explore tokens. So we'll likely be meeting up with that shadow soon enough. I might be able to bide my time just long enough to get this shadow that's sitting way out here to hopefully land somewhere here. And with my aura of an additional one on top of the one I already have, I would be able to do a shockwave that would potentially take out both if I can get the positioning right. Now, one thing that I miss doing right after my Virtues turn is as soon as I go ahead and use my actions, I need to discard any cards that are in my left or right hand that I used. And I definitely use Courtesy, so this card needs to go to the discard pile and should have at the end of my Virtue turn. There's no gameplay impact, but I did just catch that. So now I get to replace that card with something in my hand, and I'll show you the two cards that I currently have as options. Right now I have Finesse and Guile. So one is going to add or remove a darkness card. The other is going to give me a fight 4, or I can gain 2 luck cubes. I've decided to slot Finesse in my left hand. Allows me to add or remove 1 darkness card. I now have to draw up, so I have 2 cards in hand. So we'll go ahead and grab the last Virtue card for Providence, and it is Elegance. And that Elegance card I just picked up is awesome. It allows me to place 2 lights. So I'm really going to want to get that into one of my hands in a future round. Now, the next thing I want to make mention of, again, just for clarity, is I did my cleanup of my hand a little bit out of turn there. I did it after the darkness had initiated. And again, you're supposed to do that as soon as you're done resolving your actions with your Virtue. But again, there was no gameplay impacts. We caught that before we're ready to move into this next round, thankfully. So let's go ahead now and do some dice rolling for Providence and see if Solomon Kane can continue to nab exploration tokens. We'll go ahead and roll our 4 dice, hoping for a good solid rolls. We have nothing in the reserve slots now. That was a pretty good roll. It gives me options, but I really don't need that many wild dice. So with 4 dice, I usually can try to split this across 2 actions, or maybe take 1 bigger action with 3 dice. But if I can make one of these wilds or faith symbols turn into something else, more specifically bravery or fear, that would certainly be handy in terms of potentially using finesse or valor here. So let's go ahead and roll this and see if we land one of those. No, we still got the same result we had before. This was a turn with a lot of different choices strategically on the board, and also in terms of the actions that I had. So first off, we got Resolve here, and you can see that I satisfied the faith requirement there. This is a wild to cover the determination here needed, and then we've got a Pain. That'll allow me to move 2 or move up to 2 light to 2 different sockets. This was also really hard to decide on because I could shift the light that's on Providence to different sockets to help me with tests, for instance. I could have really just gone like this to shuffle these around like this, and this will allow me to get bonuses of 2 on top of as a modification to my tests, and I'd still be able to keep my die. The only thing I'd lose is that increased aura size around Providence of being up to 2 away. But that's okay. But that's not what I'm going to actually use it for. Instead, I'm going to use it to move 2 in order to give myself options when the shadows start coming in. So Solomon Kane is going to move from his current position all the way over here to this corner. So why did I try to focus on moving 2 away when there's an exploration token that was right adjacent to me that would have been outside of the Shadow's aura that was sitting right beside me? The reason is twofold. One is by putting myself here, I am now further away from the Shadow, but on top of it, I now have my Virtue standing in between us, which means if this Shadow activates and has to move to Solomon Kane in order to engage, I'm going to have a choice as to whether that Shadow goes through this path, straight through the Virtue, or around the other side. So I could choose it to interact with Providence, and that would cause a shockwave getting rid of the Shadow off the board, and that may work to my advantage. The other reason I'm doing this is because I really don't know if I trust Gaston in general, and he's going to consume that exploration token in his space on his activation, which is unfortunate, so I can't do anything about that exploration token during my turn, but I can try to get ahead of him by removing exploration tokens that he is going after potentially. And again, I could be totally wrong as to his intent. He may be actually trying to help me in this scenario, but I am totally unsure of that. All my actions are complete. I've gone ahead and discarded the card that was here, which was Resolve. It's now up in the discard pile. I've replaced it with a card I had in my hand, which is called Elegance. This will allow me to place 2 light, which is a bit above what I need, but that will help me to get the light on this location right here, which will help me big time with tests going forward, and I definitely need to go after that. But I also need to start getting these exploration tokens as quickly as possible. And on the other side of things, I need to now draw a card back up, but my deck is now depleted, so we need to reshuffle the discard pile. The card I ended up getting in hand at the top was Talk 4 or gain 2 Mercy Cubes. It's now time for Gaston to trigger. The Seeker ability will have him move to the nearest exploration token. He's currently on one, so he's not moving anywhere, which means that his Vandal keyword will now trigger because he didn't move on his turn, and he will take that exploration token and place it on his discovery card. And this is one of the major reasons I'm really intrigued by the fact that Gaston is keeping track of his own exploration tokens. I really want to know why. Moving into the darkness turn, we ignore the top section. Next it says a sentry, scout, and shadow moves to engage if they are within the surrounding area or near to Solomon Kane. Nobody is currently, so we can skip that whole section. We go down to the next one, no sentries, no scouts. We continue moving down. The closest shadow moves to engage. And here we go. It looks like my movement of 2 really paid off to give me the option to have Providence guard Solomon Kane from a shadow moving into his space and having to pull an event card. So this worked out really, really good. Plus the other shadow seems to be far enough away that it won't cause too much trouble. But I'm going to take a quick read on the card and no, the furthest shadow will not be moving. This is the only activation on the card that's going to have a shadow coming. The only downside is, and actually this is a plus for us, the spawn for the shadow that will come after a shockwave is done is going to be at X. So it's going to place both shadows extremely far away and hopefully they'll come at us at the same time and I can get Providence back on the board in order to do another shockwave to keep protecting Solomon from the darkness. So I'm choosing to have the darkness move into the same place with Providence. I could have easily had it go around. As I mentioned, I'm not doing that and a shockwave is triggered. The shockwave causes ripple effects in the unseen realm, and not only would have Providence's shockwave would have taken out the shadow in its own space, because my aura has been powered up by an additional 1 beyond the 1 it already has. If there had been any shadows 2 away from Providence in any direction, they all would have been taken out. And finally on the darkness card, a new shadow is going to arrive on the scene as our threshold is currently at 2. And now we move into a brand new round. Let's go ahead and roll our dice. Providence is on the board. We're going to have to spend some dice in order to get Providence back into the scene. Let's see how it goes. And we may not want to do that right away anyway. This is a great roll in terms of options. I've chosen to go ahead and flip one of my bravery dice to a fear to give me a little bit more options, and I still have a faith die up here or potentially a wild depending on how I use it. Here are the actions that I've allocated my dice to, and I don't want anything left in the reserve. I would have loved to have enough dice to pull off an explore action, but I'm choosing to wait it out because I know for a fact that Gaston will move into my space as it's the nearest exploration token, but it won't actually try and take it until the next turn around. So I've got an extra turn here to take care of that exploration token before Gaston does. And again, I could be doing this and shooting myself in the foot, but I'm doing this because I don't trust him. So we're going to go ahead right now and we're going to use this in order to place some light rather than move. So this is going to allow me to make Providence as powerful as she can be. And with the final action over here, we're going to place Providence onto the board. Now, it's worth noting that when you bring your virtue into play, you have free choice to place it wherever you want, so long as you don't place it in the same area as an immortal. In other words, like a shadow, for instance. But I could place it all the way over here, and I could potentially pay enough dice to trigger a shockwave to take them out. But again, that would have Providence on the wrong side of the board for where I actually need her to help with Solomon Kane. And this can become the main negative with Providence when playing solo is, yes, she's very powerful, but she can only be in one location, and as these scenarios grow in size, having the 4 separate virtues is very, very helpful. However, the powers that Providence has as one virtue are split across the 4 others, so it presents pros and cons to whichever way you choose to play. The other thing worth noting is you can actually place your virtue right onto a spawn tile and you won't have any issues with that except when a spawn is called for in that location, and then you have to make a choice as to whether or not the individual spawn there doesn't spawn, and similar to other rules I've explained prior, if you choose not to have that individual spawn there, then you're going to tick up the danger level, so that's bad. And that's one of the major reasons why I didn't plant Providence right here. I'd rather her be here because her aura of +2 gives me protection on all the rest of the exploration tokens and keeps my protection around Solomon Kane pretty tight. As soon as these shadows get into the zone of affection around Solomon Kane's tests, I am going to blow them away. Now, we currently didn't use our left and right hand cards, but we do always have the choice to just straight up discard them if we want to get cards that are actually in our hand currently onto the table. But looking at the 2 cards in my hand and their requirements based on the fact I don't have much for reserve dice, and these are going to give me mercy and luck cubes, which I have a few of already and haven't purposely used them because I'm waiting for the perfect time frame to make use of them. There's no reason to let these ones go. I'm quite happy with them. One allows me to place 2 light. The other one allows me to fiddle with the darkness deck. Both of those are really handy. So now we're going to go ahead and trigger Gaston, who's going to move from this location into the same space as Solomon Kane for the exploration token. Good news being that the Vandal keyword will not trigger because he's already moved this turn. Time for the darkness turn. Nothing on the story section. In the near section, we have nothing surrounding Solomon Kane. In the far section, we definitely have 2 shadows, and the first one that mentions shadows is the furthest shadow moves 2 to threaten. Well, a 2 movement is not going to get that shadow within any kind of aura to affect Solomon Kane's test, so we'll just go ahead and pick one of the 2 as they're equal distance to Solomon Kane and activate it. The shadow is on the move, and you'll note that I actually placed a shadow here. And that's it. There's no more shadow activations going on. The only other shadow that could have activated would have been this one here, but it's not going to. There's a spawn at X, and thankfully we're at the threshold. We're literally 1 movement on the danger track to having a 3rd shadow show up, so hopefully that doesn't happen. It's worth noting that the darkness deck is down to 4 from 8 where we started this particular scene, and we do have this finesse card which allows me to add or remove darkness, so I could use this to buy myself more time or to just kind of let the darkness close in on me. But I'm trying to get all these exploration tokens resolved. I'd rather not have the darkness just completely surround me. So let's go ahead and start our brand new turn here for Providence. We're rolling 4 dice. We're looking to explore the token that's in our space. That's a pretty good roll. We got 1 of almost everything. Here are the 2 actions I'm choosing to do on my board. We're going to do a move 1 and we're going to do an explore 0. We'll start with the explore. For the explore action, we check our clarity to see if we get modification to it. We are so close to getting a +1, but nothing there just yet. Thankfully, there are no shadows with their aura affecting Solomon Kane, so no -1s coming from each shadow. And this time we get to make use of the fact that Providence is inside of our aura for Solomon Kane. So based on this one being filled in, which is a +X, so +3 to all tests for Solomon Kane. We grab an event card and reveal it and look at the far right hand side for our hero Solomon Kane. It's a 4 with the 3 we get from Providence is a 7, which is just as good of a result as we got last time. Thankfully, because of Providence, this will end up being successful, because if it had just been a 4 by itself without her help, we would have not been able to explore this particular token. So D204 triggers again. We haven't been able to get up to the threshold of 9+, which would give us a different discovery card that probably has even better benefits, nor have we had the one below this one that actually probably has a worse outcome. So we're sitting pretty good in the middle. This gives us a +1 on clarity, which guess what? That's going to give us that modification boost in the future for explore actions. We get a +1 on compassion, which pushes us even further towards getting up to a +2, and then we remove this exploration token. So clarity is going to move up to 7, compassion will move up to 8. I'm liking how this is going so far, and of course we have to remove the exploration token now. With that now complete, we can go ahead and do our move action I want to do with Solomon Kane. I'm going to position him right here so he can go either here in the future or out the door over here. I'm quite happy with how things have been panning out so far. We'll see if that continues with the shadows closing in. So taking a look at my hand right now, this Elegance card usually is amazing because you can place 2 light, but right now there's no need for it as all the light I can place is in play. So this is the one I'm going to actually go ahead and discard in order to bring a card into my hand that will give us more mercy cubes, because I know I can have up to 3 and right now I only have 1. And again, I'm waiting for the perfect time to use them. I also have luck cubes, and don't worry, you will see these in action. I will show you how they work. This is going to place interrogation to this slot, and I'm happy to leave finesse here. Drawing a card to replenish my hand back up to 2 cards. This is a great one because it allows me to move up to 2, which is perfect for this situation. And because Solomon Kane dove into Gaston's space and dealt with the exploration token, Gaston now is going to trigger Seeker first, going to move towards the nearest exploration token, which will actually put Gaston in the same space as Solomon Kane, as there's kind of a fight here between the 2 different tokens. Again, I don't even know if I'm fighting with him for any good reason yet. This could be really comical if he ends up being on my side. So Gaston has moved into the spawn area, the same with Solomon Kane, and again, no Vandal trigger there because there's no exploration token, plus the fact he just moved this turn, so we can move along to Darkness. Ignoring story as normal, and also ignoring near because nothing is technically near to Solomon Kane right now. The shadow is 2 spaces away, so outside of that, it's considered far. So we go through this far section, and it says the closest shadow moves 1 to threaten. So this shadow is going to land in this space and sit there quite happily, messing with Solomon Kane's upcoming tests. And that will be it. Even though there's a spawn here, we're already at the threshold of 2 on the board, so nothing more to add. It's also kind of comical looking at Solomon Kane with this gun pointed straight at the immortal. Remember though, there are 2 different divides here, the physical realm and the spiritual realm. So as of right now, the only individuals that are currently in this space are just Solomon Kane and Gaston. The rest is all happening in the unseen realm. And we're back over to Providence to start a new turn. Let's go ahead and roll some dice. I know what my plan of action is. Let's see if we can pull it off. This worked out perfectly. I'm able to move and explore with Solomon Kane. I'll be doing it in that exact order. Solomon Kane is going to move from his current position over here. And now he's going to go ahead and interact with that Explore token. Again, this is great because I get the benefit from Providence based on the aura being 2, and Providence is 2 spaces away from Solomon Kane. I'm also more than a space away from the shadow, which ensures I don't get any negatives. Going into this check for Explore, we're going to get a +1 to start because of our clarity level. The darkness will have no effect in terms of negatives, and Providence is going to add 3 to the check as well. So we're going in with a total of 4 already. Let's go ahead and pull an event card. Now, the other thing to note is I have the ability with the cubes in my cloud to change one of these event card pulls if I'm really trying, for instance, the gun to maybe get the best result. Maybe I'll try that and see what happens. The first card I pulled off the top of the event deck is not a good one. It is a 2. So 2 on top of the 3 and the 1 I have, that's going to be a 6. That's a pretty good result, but I would love to get a 9. So seeing as I have 2 luck cubes, I'm going to spend 1 in order to pull another event card and hope for a better amount as a base. And the next one in row is a 5. That is much better, and on top of the 3 from Providence and the 1 from Clarity, that gives us the 9 we're looking for. And remember, on the right-hand side, the best possible result could be a 7, and the average in this spot is a 4. Look at this, guys. We found something. It says the very thing. Kane spots a door bar affixed to the wall. It says we're going to go ahead and gain +1 on our strength, which is awesome because that will actually bump us back up to a +1 modifier. We also get this right here, which was called upon by the chapter. We needed to get 2 purity. We've got our 2 purity points. We're going to place those 2 things on the cloud or somewhere within easy reach for reference, as the chapter required us to have certain amounts of purity to get a certain outcome in this particular thing. And I believe we got the best one you can possibly get thanks to Providence's boost and the +1 on clarity that we got just in the nick of time at the end here. You'll also notice this is perfect too because you'll see this symbol down here with an arrow that kind of rotates. That basically means we've triggered the end of a chapter, and this is different than anything you've seen in the prior videos where the darkness deck has been the major timer of the game in terms of how much time you have to deal with a particular chapter. You can actually run into discovery cards based on your progress through a chapter where you may come to the end of a chapter quicker than you think, or it might take a little bit longer and more digging to eventually get to that ending. So that opens up a whole bunch of options in terms of the storytelling within the game, because I was certainly not expecting it to end right now. So even though that symbol showed up triggering the end of the chapter, we do get to finish our current turn that we're in, so all the dice that I had placed on the board are removed. I didn't place anything in my left or right hand, but I could choose to discard some cards if I wanted to set myself up going into this next chapter. The fun part is I have no idea what I'm going to be going up against. I know for a fact of the 2 cards I have in my hand, the one on the left is not going to be really high on the list for me to get out, and the resolving one allows me to move 2 or move up to 2 light from different sockets. So this actually could be really good because I could actually move some light from Providence's board into a situation where if we run into a story, it could actually go on the path instead. So that actually gives me some flexibility that I do like. And I really like Finesse because it allows me to add and remove darkness. So let's go ahead and actually get rid of Interrogation, and we'll replace it with Resolve. We'll draw up a card, so we have 2 in hand, and we got Dignity. And we certainly don't want to forget about our +1 in strength, which will actually give us a +1 modifier going forward. So let's move forward with the resolution of the chapter. Chapter 3A is a scene, and our outcome here, based on the chapter coming to an end, is dependent upon how many purity points we have. As we have 2, we get to go to 4A. Now, this is the first time that we've ever had purity points show up, but basically these are going to be a representation of how well the virtue is doing with the current chapter. So when you gain these as you move through a chapter, like we just did, you place them in the cloud area. Now, because I gained them right at the end of the chapter, which then of course triggered based on the icon that was showing that we should resolve the chapter, I didn't bother placing them on the cloud because we're going to use them right now. And then purity points in a given chapter are then discarded at the end of it. Now we move into chapter 4a, which is considered a story and is titled The Betrayal. Is yonder not a bar fixed to the wall? Aye, but 'tis made fast, says the Frenchman, tugging at it. A section of the wall swings back to reveal a small secret room, and the two men bend over the grisly thing lying upon the floor. The skeleton of a man, says Gaston, and behold how his bony leg is shackled to the floor. He was imprisoned here and died. Nay, says Kane, the skull is cleft. Methinks mine host had a grim reason for the name of this hellish tavern. Gaston draws his sword and with an exhibition of remarkable strength cuts the chain adjoining the ring on the leg to a ring set deep in the log floor. Why would he shackle a skeleton to the floor, muses the Frenchman. Mon bleu, 'tis a waste of good chain. Now, monsieur, he ironically addresses the white heap of bones, I have freed you, and you may go where you like. Have done, Kane's voice is deep. No good will come of mocking the dead. The dead should defend themselves, laughs Larman. Somehow, I will slay the man who kills me, though my corpse climbs up 40 fathoms of ocean to do it. Kane turns to the outer door, closing the door of the secret room behind him. He turns to face Larman as he exits the room just as the Frenchman levels a pistol at his face. Move not, monsieur. The voice is low and silky. Move not, or I will scatter your few brains over the room. The special rules for this chapter state that we gain +1 clarity, so we'll be jumping up to the 8th position. And certainly feeling the betrayal, our clarity has never been stronger in this case. We now need to go ahead and create a new darkness deck of 4 cards. With that complete, we also draw Discovery card 207. Revelation. Gaston the Butcher, said the Englishman soberly. Fool that I was to trust you. You range far, murderer. I remember you now, with that cursed great hat off. I saw you in Canalis some years agone. Aye, and now you will see me never again, Gaston replied. So you can see here this is an ongoing effect. It states before resolving this chapter, for each expiration token on D206, choose one effect. Either remove 1 light token, which is not nice, or we're going to go ahead and increase the danger, and this is going to remain in play. I think my strategy going into this one is going to be to not add a bunch of darkness cards to the deck. I'm going to try to keep it just at 4 and only use that amount of time to get light on Solomon Kane's path, because I do have this really cool resolve card that will allow me to move up to 2 other light from different sockets. So I could take them from Providence, for instance, and move them onto Solomon Kane's path. Even though that will make Providence a little weaker if we go into a scene next, I'm able to accomplish this without having to dump a whole bunch of darkness cards into the deck, and that could be a payoff in terms of it messing with my stat track or anything else going on around my character. So let's go ahead with the first turn here. We're going to roll to see what we get in terms of dice. There's 2 ways I could go, at least in my head, in terms of a strategy here. I've gone ahead and for sure want to place some light on the path, which I'm going to go ahead and do right now by paying these 2 dice. The other 2 I'm putting in my reserve, but I may end up using finesse if I don't end up discarding it to remove darkness if I can happen to get light on there. Now, if I could get, say, for instance, 3 light over 3 turns, then I could go ahead and try to remove that last darkness card in order to just move on. Solomon Kane's path is getting a little bit brighter, but the darkness card waits for us, and just before we do that, we need to decide, do we want to discard anything from our left or right hand? As I said, this is really tough because I could definitely make use of both of the cards in hand, or I could try to purposely cycle them to try and get or find that card that allows me to place 2 light, which I currently don't have in my hand. I have 2 other cards that aren't really going to help me in this situation right now, although there is some benefits on them that could help me later, so I could be setting myself up for success later on, but these are really handy right now, so I might just leave them. Story section on the top of the darkness card says -1 clarity, -1 strength, or we can have -1 compassion. So we get a choice here. And just based on my current numbers right now, I think it makes sense to drop compassion down by 1. Clarity could have easily been another option because I do have the ability to move down one without losing anything on the modification, but we've used Clarity quite a few times in this so far, not to say that that could continue going forward, but I think I'm happy with this for now. Let's go ahead and roll 4 dice and see how it lands. Again, we always have our reroll, we always have our flip if we really need them. Okay, we got ourselves Faith, 2 Bravery, and a Fear. I'm going to choose to go ahead and reroll one of the Bravery. I think we have a little bit too many of those. Okay, and we ended up getting a Fear. Now we have way too many of those, including the one in our reserved area. Well, it appears my plan went sideways because I have no way to be able to make use of Integrity, as I can only have 1 Wild in there and I don't have either Pain or Determination, so that's not good. However, I do have and could use, which I think I might actually, this could be a great time to use a Mercy Cube as a stand-in die to represent one of the symbols. So I'm going to take that from the cloud. I currently only have 1 Mercy die in there and 1 Luck die, and maybe I'll change up what I'm going to do here because I was going to go ahead and remove a Darkness card. Let's see what we can pull off. So we know we would need to cover up at least one of these in order to get some light down. So let's do that. I might move this here into this slot so that we guarantee to get a light this turn. We can also attempt to, and we will, remove a Darkness card, which will bring us down, which is good. And then I can save up to hopefully go after this Resolve, although neither of these are going to help with the symbols I need. So I'm really going to be banking on the next roll to get what I need, which could be pretty sketchy. This should actually be pretty fun to see whether it pays off and I can go into a bright outcome based on this very risky move. So I'm removing a Darkness card, so 1 is going to be taken away. And next up, we're going to place 1 light. I had to show you guys the card that I just discarded because it would have been a removal of 1 light, which could have been pretty tough for me. However, having the card Resolve to allow me to move 2 other light into this row for Solomon Kane would have still got me up to 3, even if this thing had triggered and removed a light. But it didn't. Here are the 2 cards that I have in hand. I have to choose one of them to go into this slot down here. I'm definitely not going to discard the one on the far right, but you can see here on these cards, the one on the right would have me increase the danger level, which would push me up to the next threshold of 3 shadows. I don't necessarily like that, although it's nice to potentially bump up a stat like Clarity to get a +2 modifier instead in the future, or to just bump up Strength or Compassion. I'm not sure I want to do that just yet, so I might actually just go with Guile. Drawing another card into my hand, I have Courtesy, and of course Guile's benefit here is going to allow me to potentially gain 2 luck dice or a fight 4. The next Darkness card states -1 Compassion. And that's pretty unfortunate because I have a +1 in Compassion thanks to being on 7. Now I'm going to go to 6 and lose that modification of +1. Compassion has been updated, and let's move along. So here's where things get interesting because I no longer need to go ahead and move up to 2 light from different sockets onto the path. I could, that would certainly help me guaranteeing a bright outcome, or I could just place 1 light to get me up to 3 on the path and hope that the last Darkness card doesn't mess with me. So I have a choice to make. We'll see how the dice roll and what I can do to mitigate this stuff. Ooh, that's perfect. Wow, so if I really wanted to move some stuff over from Providence, then I could. Interesting. I'm actually going to go ahead and try to risk it. I'm going to take an action here to place 1 light, which will get 3 on Solomon Kane's path. I'm going to go ahead and knock my strength down by 1 in order to gain 2 more luck cubes. I already have 1, so now we'll have 3 going into the next scenario. Remember, luck can be used to re-pull an event card for a modifier, and I can do it multiple times so long as I have the luck cubes to do it, so it can be really handy. So this will allow me to have 3 light on the path, keep all my light on Providence. I do lose 1 modification on the strength, which I already did. I dropped myself from a 7 down to a 6, which will lose me a +1 on strength checks, which is unfortunate. Now I'll go ahead and discard my Guile card. We'll draw up, well, I guess we should place a new card and see if we want to discard the Resolve, and then we'll see if we want to draw stuff up. I'm going to go ahead and play Courtesy in my left hand, and we'll draw the final card from the Virtue deck. We're going to need to reshuffle that discard pile. I've chosen to place Courtesy in my left hand, and the draw pile for Virtue has been fully shuffled and ready to go for later on. And now it's time to reveal the Darkness card and see how this chapter comes to a close. It comes to a close with a removal of 1 light. I should have known. Okay, well, so I could take it from the path or I could take it from Providence, and as you know, I want to be on the bright side of things, so I'm definitely going to take it from Providence. So I really like the idea of getting some kind of bonus to test really soon rather than waiting on that one, and I like the 1+ die, so I'm going to go ahead and actually remove the aura size, and I'll work towards boosting that up later on. So moving to the outcome of the chapter, we're on the bright path, so 5A is the chapter we're moving to. The Puritan rages inwardly as he stands, hands raised in the air, while Armand slips his pistols and sword from their sheaths and casts them to the floor. "That's much better, monsieur," says Gaston, stepping back. Kane bends a grim eye to the dapper fellow, who now stands bareheaded, hat in one hand, as the other levels his long pistol. "Gaston the butcher," says the Englishman somberly. "Fool that I was to trust you. You range far, murderer. I remember you now, with that cursed great hat off. I saw you in Calas some years agone. Aye, and now you will see me never again. What was that?" "Rats exploring yon skeleton," said Kane, watching the bandit like a hawk, waiting for a single slight wavering of that black gun muzzle. The sound was the rattle of bones. "Like enough," returned the other. "Now, Monsieur Kane, I know you carry considerable money on your person. I had thought to wait until you slept and then slay you, but the opportunity presented itself and I took it. You trick easily." "I had little thought that I should fear a man with whom I had broken bread," said Kane, a deep timbre of slow fury sounding in his voice. Let's take a look at the keywords and stats section. We have Gaston and Solomon Kane. So this is a talk action for either of them, depending on how successful we are. We look at the particular discovery card. We also have a villain level. So when we're looking at the event card, when we're resolving for Gaston, we'll be looking in the middle number for him. And then we have gloater, which is a keyword. Gloater states a gloater seeks to embolden themselves or belittle others by their boasting. At the end of each virtue turn, each gloater in Solomon Kane's surroundings takes a talk test against him. The base value for this test is N. In this case, the base value is going to be 0. Solomon Kane, on the other hand, has become a prisoner and has that keyword beside him. It says a prisoner has been captured by his foes and is at their mercy. Players cannot move this character, though game effects can. The character may still take any tests that are available to a prisoner. So it looks like we're going to be talking our way out of this one, and it states here for objectives, if Gaston is defeated, place to purity. Danger is 8+. We remove a purity, so if danger gets overwhelming on us, we're going to start losing purity points. And then clarity, if it's from 0 to 4 on the stat track, which we actually have it up to 8, so we're good there, then we remove 1 purity. So really, we're doing pretty good from the 2 that could be bad. We just got to focus on defeating Gaston is the real thing here. And then we've got the outcome. Now again, depending on how this played out and how you played, you may be in a situation where you're not in such a positive state like I am. You could easily play this and things could go south and it can throw this story sideways quite quickly, which is very cool. I've gone ahead and created the Darkness deck of 10 cards, and this is the largest Darkness deck we've started off with in any chapter so far. Discovery card D208 states, Revelation. Kane gathers himself like a giant wolf about to launch himself in a death leap, but Gaston's hand is like a rock and the pistol never trembles. We will have no death plunges after the shot. The Discovery card is an ongoing effect with the gear icon. It states, for each bravery used to activate a talk test, the virtues gain a +1 modifier. That's pretty cool. For each fear die used to activate a talk test, virtues gain a -1 modifier. And then it states for each exploration token on the D206 card, which is this one over here for Gaston that we had earlier in play, which only has 1, Gaston's going to gain +1 to his talk tests. And this also, as it states at the bottom, remains in play. And as you can see here, we're moving into a scene, so we're going to have to place a corpse, Gaston, Shadow, Solomon Kane, Justice, which will end up being Providence, and another Shadow. And that's going to do it. We are all set up for scene inside of Chapter 5A called Confronting Gaston. If you've enjoyed the playthrough to this point, let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know what you think of the gameplay to this point. And hopefully you'll join me as we continue our journey through Rattle of Bones together. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.